They look calm. They say they're fine. But behind that cool silence is a storm they'll never admit. If you've ever been with an avoidant partner, or maybe you are one, you know exactly what I mean. It's not a way works, not what they say. It's about they hide. So today we're going deep beneath the surface. Avoiding never work, because when avoidants say, I'm okay, that's when they're often hurting the most. Here's what's really going on beneath, I'm fine. They shut down not because they don't care, but because they're overwhelmed. That emotional shutdown is their way of surviving in the moment. Imagine being in a situation where your mind is saying, connect, but your nervous system is screaming, danger. That's what it's like inside the mind of someone with avoidant attachment. When conflict arises or intimacy deepens, their system doesn't process it as love. It processes it as a threat. Even simple questions like, what's wrong? Or, are you okay? Can trigger their internal alarm, and instead of leaning in, they lean out, not because they don't want closeness, but because closeness feels unsafe. The words, I'm fine, become armor, a way to stop the emotional bleeding without showing the wound. Their tone may be calm, their posture relaxed, but don't be fooled. Inside, their heart might be racing, their thoughts spinning, and their emotions locked behind a vault they don't even know how to open. This isn't emotional coldness. This is emotional overload. You see, avoidants were often raised in environments where expressing emotions led to punishment, shame, or rejection. They were taught, sometimes by action, sometimes by silence, that emotions aren't safe, that being vulnerable means being weak. So, as adults, they learn to regulate their inner world by shutting down rather than opening up. When things feel too intense, too chaotic, or too close, they freeze. But it never works. Not physically, but her mind starts running, calculating how to avoid further vulnerability. Should I stop responding? Should I pull back? What if they get tired of me? Their body may still be in the room, but emotionally, they've exited. And here's the heartbreaking part. They usually don't even know they're doing it. It feels automatic, like an internal fire alarm went off and now they have to escape the burning building. Even if the fire doesn't really exist, it's not logical. It's primal. It's wired into their nervous system as a survival response. When they say, I'm fine, what they often mean is, I'm emotionally maxed out, and I don't know how to say that without feeling exposed. So you see, the silence isn't peace. It's pressure. It's a fragile, temporary calm hiding a deep inner chaos. And if you're on the other side of that silence, it can feel like rejection. But in truth, it's rarely about you. It's about their own fear of drowning in emotions they never learned how to swim through. They say, I need space, or I prefer being on my own. And on the surface, it sounds like strength, like they're fiercely independent, grounded, and self-sufficient. But if you dig just beneath that layer, you'll often find something much more fragile, a deep fear of rejection that they've spent years learning how to cover up. Avoidants have a complicated relationship with closeness. They often grew up in environments where emotional needs weren't met. Maybe they were told they were too sensitive, or their vulnerability was ignored, mocked, or punished. Over time, they built a protective shell. They learned that needing someone was dangerous, that the more you depend on someone, the more power they have to hurt you or abandon you. So now, as adults, they present themselves as people who don't need anyone. They create distance and call it independence, but often it's just fear in disguise. The idea of needing someone, of depending on another person emotionally, can feel humiliating to them, not because love itself is wrong, but because deep down they associate dependence with weakness, vulnerability with pain, and closeness with the threat of abandonment. So rather than risk being left, they stay in control by keeping others at arm's length. This is why they often pull back when things get good. Just when the relationship starts to deepen, when never real emotional connection begins to form. That's when their inner alarm starts to go off. What if they stop loving me? What if I'm not enough? What if I get hurt again? These aren't conscious thoughts most of the time. They're automatic, buried under years of conditioning. So instead of opening up, they create emotional distance. They might become quiet, dismissive, or overly focused on themselves. They might talk about how they don't believe in love, or how people always leave, or how they're just better alone. But these aren't truths. They're defense mechanisms. stories they've told themselves to feel safe, because it's easier to say, "I don't need anyone," than to admit, "I'm afraid you'll leave if I let you in." This is the painful irony. They want love. They crave connection. But the very thing they want also feels like the thing that could destroy them. So they protect themselves by pretending they don't care, by acting strong, by withdrawing into their fortress of independence, all while quietly hoping someone will love them enough to stay anyway. Control is often mistaken for confidence, especially in people with avoidant attachment. On the outside, they seem composed, put together, and in charge of their emotions. They might lead with logic, keep their surroundings in order, and make decisions without hesitation. But beneath that controlled exterior often lies something much more tender and raw: shame. Not just the fleeting embarrassment we all feel now and then, but a deep, lingering sense that something about them is inherently unworthy of love. Avoidants have often learned that emotional needs make them vulnerable, and that vulnerability opens the door to criticism, rejection, or abandonment. So over time, they've developed a coping mechanism: control everything they can. If they control their environment, their emotions, their relationships, then maybe they won't get hurt. If they never show too much, never rely on anyone, never express a real need, then maybe they won't be seen as too much or not enough. Shame tells things: if someone really sees you, they'll leave. So they control what others see. They hold back their feelings. They avoid difficult conversations. They keep people at a safe distance. It's not about arrogance. It's about protection. Every move, every calculated silence, every emotional retreat is designed to keep that inner shame from being exposed. And here's the cruel part: the more they try to control, the more disconnected they become. Because true intimacy requires openness, spontaneity, and imperfection. But when you're trapped in shame, all of those things feel like risks you can't afford to take. This creates a painful cycle. The avoidant person feels shame for having emotional needs, so they hide them. But hiding them leaves them feeling unseen and alone. That loneliness reinforces the shame, and the cycle starts again. They often carry a quiet belief that their true self is unlovable, so they only present a filtered version of themselves, the cool, unbothered, low-maintenance version. And when relationships fail or intimacy fades, they tell themselves it's because they got too close, when in reality, it's because they never truly let themselves be known. This kind of control becomes a silent prison. From the outside, it looks like strength. Inside, it's exhausting. They're not trying to dominate others. They're trying to keep their shame from spilling out. But the cost is high. You can't selectively shut down shame without also shutting down joy, connection, and love. And eventually, that control starts to collapse under its own weight. When you're dealing with an avoidant person, you're not just interacting with who they are today. You're encountering a complex system of emotional survival that's been shaped over years, sometimes decades, of experiences, pain, and unconscious programming. The present-day version of them may look mature, responsible, even emotionally self-sufficient. But behind that exterior is a child who learned very early on that vulnerability is dangerous, love isn't guaranteed, and trust can cost you everything. Most avoidants didn't just wake up one day and decide to be distant or detached. Their behavior was shaped by what they had to do to survive emotionally when they were younger. If they had caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, critical, dismissive, or inconsistent, they adapted. They figured out, often at a young age, that showing emotions got them nowhere, or worse, made things worse. So they learned to shut down, keep things to themselves, and rely only on their own internal world. That way they wouldn't be disappointed again. Fast forward to adulthood, and those same coping mechanisms are still running the show, not consciously. In fact, most avoidants aren't even fully aware of how their past is still dictating their present. But when someone gets close, when intimacy begins to grow, when emotions rise to the surface, that's when the old programming kicks in. The walls come up, the distancing begins. Not because the person in front of them is unsafe, but because their inner wiring says, "Don't trust this. Don't let your guard down. It's not safe." It's almost like they're living in two timelines at once: the present relationship and the unresolved emotional injuries from the past. So when a partner says something as simple as, I need more from you. The avoidant doesn't just hear a request for connection. They hear echoes of past criticism, of never being enough, of being too much. Their body reacts before their mind can reason it out. They shut down, withdraw, or push the other person away, not because they don't care, but because a younger version of themselves is still in charge at that moment. This is why healing avoidant patterns isn't about just trying harder in relationships. It requires going back to the source. It means recognizing that the present struggles with intimacy, trust, and closeness are rooted in old wounds. And until those wounds are acknowledged and processed, the past will continue to cast a shadow over the present, no matter how much love is right there waiting in front of them. For most people, love feels like safety. It feels like warmth, support, and belonging. But for someone with avoidant attachment, love can feel like danger. Not because they don't want it, but because closeness triggers a part of them that associates intimacy with loss of control, emotional pain, or abandonment. To them, love isn't just an emotion, it's a risk. When someone gets too close emotionally, an avoidant person may start to feel a creeping sense of discomfort. That deepening connection, which most people would find comforting, feels threatening to them. They might not even understand why. Everything could be going perfectly. The relationship might be healthy, respectful, full of promise, but their nervous system registers closeness as unsafe. It's a survival response rooted in early life experiences where love was inconsistent, conditional, or even harmful. So when someone moves toward them emotionally, asking deeper questions, showing vulnerability, wanting to bond, the avoidant instinctively starts pulling back. It's not a calculated rejection, it's often subconscious. They may suddenly become cold, distant, irritated, or even start finding flaws in the other person. This is a defense mechanism. By creating emotional distance, they regain a sense of control. Because to the avoidant, closeness feels like being swallowed, losing themselves, or becoming dependent, and that dependency terrifies them. Ironically, they usually crave connection just like anyone else. They want love, but they've learned that love is something you survive, not something you trust. So they develop strategies to keep people at a safe distance. They might focus on superficial conversations, avoid making future plans, or keep themselves constantly busy with work or distractions. In more extreme cases, they may even sabotage relationships that are going too well, not because they don't care, but because the intimacy feels suffocating. This dynamic creates confusion in relationships. Their partner might feel hurt, wondering what they did wrong, when in reality, the avoidant is retreating from the intensity of their own feelings. Their internal dialogue might be saying, "What if I lose myself?" Or, "What if they leave and I can't handle the pain?" Their fear of engulfment is often just as strong as their fear of abandonment, creating a push-pull pattern that keeps them trapped. They may not even realize they're doing it. To them, creating space feels like regaining balance. But from the outside, it can look like coldness, indifference, or even rejection. And the truth is, none of those reactions are about a lack of love. They're about a deeply conditioned fear that love itself will hurt them if they ever let it all the way in. Avoidants often get misunderstood as people who simply don't feel as deeply as others, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In reality, avoidants often feel too much, so much that their only way to cope is to suppress, deny, and bury their emotions before they become overwhelming. Their emotional world isn't empty, it's just carefully sealed off, hidden behind years of internal rules like don't show weakness, don't get attached, and keep it all together. But those buried emotions don't disappear. They don't dissolve or fade with time. They sit untouched, unprocessed, and quietly powerful beneath the surface of their calm exterior. When an avoidant says they're fine, it's usually a signal that they've already disconnected from what they're really feeling. Not because they've stopped caring, but because acknowledging their emotions feels unsafe. In their world, emotional expression often equates to exposure, and exposure for them is risky. So instead, they suppress. They push feelings down and redirect attention elsewhere, toward work, hobbies, distractions, or solitude. But this emotional shutdown isn't the absence of feeling, it's the result of feeling too much and not knowing what to do with it. Over time, this suppression becomes second nature. It happens automatically, and to those around them, it can seem like they're emotionally numb or indifferent. But deep down, Those unspoken emotions are still there: grief, longing, fear, disappointment, love, all trapped behind emotional armor. And here's the thing: suppressed emotions don't stay silent forever. They may show up later in unexpected ways, like sudden outbursts, emotional numbness, anxiety, panic attacks, or even physical symptoms like fatigue, muscle tension, or insomnia. Emotionally, they might struggle with mood swings or intense reactions to seemingly small triggers. Why? Because when emotions are buried alive, they don't die, they fester, and the more they accumulate, the heavier the internal burden becomes. Eventually, the weight of those unprocessed feelings starts to leak out, even if the avoidant doesn't fully understand where it's coming from. They might start feeling disconnected from themselves, from others, and from life in general. Joy feels muted. Relationships feel like obligations. Everything starts to feel like too much or not enough, because their emotional bandwidth is spent holding back what they were never allowed to release. Avoidants are often silently carrying a lifetime of suppressed experiences, and until they feel safe enough to open that emotional vault and learn how to feel without fear, their "I'm fine" will continue to be a mask for a depth of emotion that's simply waiting for permission to exist. When an avoidant pulls away, goes silent, or says they're fine, it's easy to assume they don't care. It can feel like you're talking to a wall, like your love isn't landing, your presence isn't valued, and your efforts are wasted. But beneath that quiet distance, there's often a silent cry echoing inside them. Please be patient with me. It's not something they'll ever say out loud, and they may not even consciously know it themselves. But the truth is, avoidants are often terrified that if they show their real feelings, they'll be rejected, misunderstood, or judged. So they ask for patience, not with words, but with their behavior. Many avoidants were never shown how to navigate emotional connection. They didn't grow up in environments where feelings were safe, acknowledged, or welcomed. Vulnerability in their experience usually led to disappointment or emotional pain. So now, when someone shows them love or tries to connect on a deeper level, they don't always know how to respond. It's not that they don't feel the emotion, it's that they don't trust what will happen if they show it. And in that uncertainty, their defense is to retreat, to go quiet, to shut down. But retreat is not rejection, it's protection. When they fall silent or need space, they're often trying to regulate internal chaos. Their nervous system is overwhelmed, their thoughts are conflicted, and their instincts are screaming to preserve emotional safety at all costs. They may be thinking, if I let this person see how much I really care, will they still love me? Or will they walk away when I need them most? That fear can be paralyzing. So instead of reaching out, they back off, hoping deep down that you'll still be there when they come back. And that's where patience becomes powerful. Not the kind of patience that enables harmful behavior or keeps you stuck in one-sided relationships, but the kind of patience that sees through the behavior and understands the wound beneath it. Avoidants don't open up through pressure, they open through safety. They begin to reveal themselves when they believe they won't be punished for being human, that they can express need, fear, sadness, or even love without being shamed or abandoned. Every small step they take toward emotional openness is a test. Can I trust you with this? Will you still stay if I show you the parts I've kept hidden? They won't ask those questions aloud, but they'll ask with their actions. And if you can recognize that silent question behind their distant gaze or careful words, you'll realize their silence isn't a door closing. It's a scared heart wondering if it's finally safe to come out. So when avoidants say, "I'm fine," they're not telling the truth. They're telling a version of themselves they've learned to survive with. That phrase isn't an update, it's a defense. It's a mask they wear to shield themselves from the world, and sometimes even from their own feelings. Underneath the silence, beneath the withdrawal, behind the cool exterior is a nervous system in overdrive, a heart full of emotions they've been taught to suppress, and a soul quietly crying out for connection without knowing how to ask for it. What looks like distance is often desperation wrapped in silence. This speech hasn't been about calling avoidance out, it's about calling them in, calling them into a space of understanding, of healing, and of compassion. Because the truth is, their behaviors are not personal attacks. They're not a reflection of how little they care, but of how deeply they've been hurt. The independence they swear by, often rooted in a fear of needing someone and being abandoned. The control they cling to, a shield against shame they've carried for far too long, and the silence they sit in, it's a signal, not of peace, but of emotional overload, fear, and emotional exhaustion. Avoidant attachment isn't a flaw, it's a wound. And like all wounds, it needs the right environment to heal. That healing doesn't come through force, pressure, or chasing. It comes through patience, through safe space, through empathy. And most of all, it comes when we stop taking their distance as rejection and start seeing it as protection. Because their behaviors may be confusing, even painful, but they make sense when you understand the emotional blueprint that shaped them. Once you recognize the scared child behind the adult mask, everything begins to change, not just for them, but for you too. To those loving and avoidant, don't lose yourself trying to break through their walls. But do understand the walls were built for a reason. Your role isn't to fix them, it's to love yourself enough to offer connection without abandoning your own needs. And to the avoidants listening, you are not broken. You are not incapable of love. You are human. You've learned to protect yourself in brilliant, complicated ways, but those same strategies are now keeping you from the intimacy you secretly crave. You don't have to heal overnight, but you do have to stop pretending that fine is all you were ever meant to be. Because the truth is, you are more than fine. You are worthy of real connection. You are allowed to be seen, to be loved, and to need. And it starts not when you figure it all out, but when you finally give yourself permission to feel, to stop running, to stop hiding, to begin the slow, courageous journey of coming home to yourself and letting others meet the real you, one unguarded moment at a time. Thank you so much for watching. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, you're not alone, and you never have to be. This space is for healing, understanding, and growing stronger together. If you found value in this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps the message reach those who need it most. And hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment of truth, growth, and real talk. Share your thoughts below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your peace, and remember, fine isn't the goal, real honest connection is. Thank you and goodbye for now. See you in the next one.